What if everything you learned about the cradle of civilization was built on a foundation of sand? Not metaphorically, literally. Because scientists just pulled ancient DNA from the remains of people who lived in Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. And what they found has forced researchers to completely rewrite the story of who the Sumerians actually were, where they came from, and why their sudden appearance in history has never quite made sense until now. Let that sink in for a second. The civilization that gave us writing, mathematics, astronomy, law codes, and monumental architecture apparently came from somewhere nobody expected. And the origin story that textbooks have been telling for generations, it just collapsed. So let us start from the beginning. Because to understand why this DNA discovery is so significant, you need to understand why the Sumerians were already one of the biggest mysteries in all of human history. Around 6,000 years ago, in the flat river plains between the Tigris and Euphrates, in what is now southern Iraq, something extraordinary happened. Cities appeared, real cities, not just collections of huts or small farming villages, but organized urban centers with temples, administrative buildings, irrigation systems, and populations numbering in the tens of thousands. The city of Uruk, considered one of the earliest true cities on Earth, had a population that may have rivaled or exceeded many modern towns. And it did not grow slowly, it erupted. Archaeologists call this the Uruk period, roughly spanning from around 4000 BCE to 3100 BCE. During this window, the Sumerians developed cuneiform writing, one of the oldest writing systems ever discovered. They created the wheel in a practical, large-scale sense. They built the ziggurat, those massive stepped temple towers that still partially stand today. They developed sophisticated legal and administrative systems that regulated trade, property, and labor. All of this in what feels, from an archaeological perspective, like an almost impossibly short time. And here is the problem that has haunted historians and archaeologists for over a century. Nobody knows where the Sumerians came from. The Sumerian language is what linguists call a language isolate. It has no confirmed relatives, no parent language, no sibling languages anywhere on Earth. When scholars study Indo-European languages, they can trace English back through Germanic roots to Proto-Indo-European. When they study Arabic, they can trace it through Semitic branches. But Sumerian sits alone, like a linguistic island with no bridges to anything else. The people living around the Sumerians spoke Akkadian, which was Semitic. But the Sumerians themselves called their own land Kalam and refer to themselves with a distinct identity. They were clearly aware that they were different from their neighbors. Ancient texts even reference a phrase, the black-headed people, which some scholars interpret as a Sumerian self-description. So who were they? For generations, historians proposed various theories. Some suggested they migrated from Central Asia. Others pointed toward the Indus Valley region. A few fringe theories suggested they came from an even more ancient civilization, now lost to time. But none of these ideas had solid genetic evidence to support them. Until now, recent ancient DNA studies focusing on the broader Fertile Crescent, and specifically on populations from the Mesopotamian region, have begun painting a radically different picture. Researchers analyzing skeletal remains from sites in Iraq, Iran, and surrounding regions found that the population structure of ancient Mesopotamia was far more complex than previously understood. The genetic signatures found in individuals associated with early Mesopotamian civilization show a mixture of ancestries, including components linked to populations from the Zagros mountain region of western Iran, populations from the Anatolian Plateau, and hunter-gatherer groups from the broader Near East. This is where things get genuinely fascinating. The Zagros mountain population component is particularly significant. Ancient DNA from hunter-gatherers and early farmers in the Zagros region shows a distinct genetic profile that differs from the farming populations of Anatolia or the Levant. And when scientists compare these Zagros-related signatures to what they find in early Mesopotamian remains, there is a meaningful overlap. This suggests that a significant portion of the ancestry of people living in early Mesopotamia traces back through these mountain populations, who eventually moved down into the lowland plains. But here is where it gets more complicated and more interesting. The genetic data does not show a single clean migration from one place. It shows layering, population mixing over centuries and millennia, which actually makes complete sense when you think about the geography. The Tigris and Euphrates valleys were extraordinarily productive agricultural land. They attracted people. Different groups moved in, interacted, interbred, and over time, something new emerged from that mixing. What this means for the Sumerian origin question is that there may not be a single ancestral homeland to point to. The Sumerians may have been, in a very real genetic sense, a synthesis, a population that crystallized from multiple incoming groups who converged on southern Mesopotamia over thousands of years. The cultural explosion we see in the archaeological record might not represent one group arriving with all their knowledge. It might represent the accumulated innovations of a diverse, blended population that reached a kind of critical mass. Now, the linguistic isolation of Sumerian still needs explaining. Genetics tells us about ancestry, but it cannot directly tell us which language a person spoke. However, the genetic diversity found in early Mesopotamian populations does suggest that the Sumerians were not an isolated, closed ethnic group. They were porous. They traded with, warred with, and absorbed people from surrounding regions. The language may have survived as a prestige language, a language of administration and ritual, even as the underlying population became increasingly mixed. This is actually not unusual in history. Latin did something similar in ancient Rome. One of the most striking findings that has emerged from this broader research is how ancient the farming foundations of Mesopotamia actually are. The groups that fed into the eventual Sumerian population had been farming in and around that region for thousands of years before the cities appeared. The Sumerians did not invent agriculture from scratch. They inherited it from a very long line of predecessors stretching back at least to the 10th millennium BCE, in places like the northern Fertile Crescent. What the Sumerians may have done is optimize it, scale it, bureaucratize it, turn subsistence farming into something resembling an industrial food system, capable of supporting massive urban populations. And that brings us to perhaps the most thought-provoking implication of all this new genetic and archaeological research. The traditional narrative treats civilization as something that was invented, like a switch was flipped and humans went from simple to complex. But the DNA evidence increasingly supports a very different view. Complexity built up gradually, invisibly, over enormous spans of time. The Sumerians were not a miraculous emergence. They were the visible tip of an iceberg that had been forming underwater for thousands of years. The real breakthrough was not writing or the wheel or ziggurats in isolation. The real breakthrough may have been population size and diversity itself. When enough people with enough different backgrounds, enough different skills, enough accumulated knowledge converge in a productive environment, something like Sumerian civilization becomes almost inevitable. The genius of Mesopotamia was not one culture, it was the mixing zone. This completely reframes the question from where did the Sumerians come from to how did the conditions arise for this kind of complexity to emerge? And the answer genetics is now pointing toward is thousands of years of population movement, agricultural development, and gradual knowledge accumulation across a wide geographic area that eventually funneled into the extraordinary productivity of the southern Mesopotamian floodplain. So the next time someone tells you that civilization appeared out of nowhere in ancient Sumer, remember what the DNA actually says. Nothing in human history comes from nowhere. Every city, every innovation, every written word has roots stretching back into the deep human past, carried in the bodies and memories of countless generations we are only now beginning to understand. The Sumerians did not drop from the sky. They rose from the earth, slowly, through migration, mixture, adaptation, and time. And honestly, that story is far more remarkable than any myth about mysterious origins could ever be. Because it means civilization was not an accident. It was inevitable. The only question is what we choose to build next.